Matthew Reynolds squinted against the autumn sun as he pulled his weathered pickup truck to a stop in front of the dilapidated Victorian house on Oakwood Heights. The for sale sign had been replaced with a smaller sold marker, but anyone with sense would question why. The once proud three-story home sagged visibly, its wraparound porch listing to one side like a sinking ship. Paint peeled in long strips from the clapboard siding, revealing gray wood beneath. A section of the roof had partially collapsed, leaving a jagged hole where rain and wildlife had free entry. "Dad, is that really it?" Emma's voice carried a mixture of shock and fascination from the passenger seat. At 10 years old, her brown eyes still held that ability to find wonder in the most unlikely places. She pressed her face against the window breath, fogging the glass. Matthew's hands tightened around the steering wheel. This was the inheritance he'd spent years avoiding, the final bequest from a grandfather he'd barely known. Now divorced, bankrupt, and with his contracting business in ruins after the economic crash, this was all he had left. Emma was with him for the weekend, the custody arrangement, a painful reminder of how much else he'd lost. That's the one kiddo, Reynolds' family legacy for whatever that's worth. Rusty, his aging German shepherd, whined from the back seat, tail thumping against worn upholstery. The dog had been with Matthew through everything: the business success, the marriage, the failure, the divorce. Now he seemed strangely eager, sensing something in the air that Matthew couldn't. They climbed out of the truck, Emma jumping down with the boundless energy of childhood, Rusty following with surprising enthusiasm for his 12 years. A cool breeze carried the scent of decaying leaves and old wood. The house loomed above them, windows like vacant eyes. "It looks like the houses you used to fix before everything went wrong." Emma's words held no accusation, just the straightforward observation of a child. She didn't yet understand the full weight of what everything went wrong meant: the failed investments, the clients who couldn't pay, the mounting debts that had cost him not just the business, but his marriage. "It's going to need more than a little fixing, Em." Matthew approached the sagging front steps cautiously, testing each one before putting his full weight down. The third step cracked ominously beneath his boot. The sound of a truck door slamming drew Matthew's attention to the hardware store across the street. Three men stood watching, making no attempt to hide their interest or their smirks. One leaned over to say something to the others, and laughter followed. "Another Reynolds throwing good money after bad." The words carried clearly across the quiet street. Matthew felt his jaw tighten, but forced himself to ignore them. He'd heard worse in the past year. The bankruptcy had been public, the divorce messier. In small towns like Oakwood Heights, everyone knew everyone's business, and failure carried a stench that lingered. The front door key was old, the mechanism stiff. It took several attempts before the lock surrendered with a grudging click. The door swung inward with a groan that seemed to come from the house itself. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light that penetrated broken shutters. The foyer opened to a grand staircase, once impressive but now dangerous, with missing balusters and rotted treads. To the right, a formal living room with a massive stone fireplace. To the left, what must have been a dining room, its chandelier hanging at a precarious angle. "It smells like the library's special collections room," Emma observed, wandering toward the living room. "Old books and secrets." Matthew followed, testing the floorboards with each step. Despite the decay, he could see what this place had once been. The craftsmanship was evident in the crown molding, the intricate woodwork around the fireplace, the built-in bookshelves. These weren't things you saw in modern construction. They were relics of an era when houses were built to last generations. Rusty hadn't waited for caution. The dog moved through the house with purpose, nose to the ground, pausing occasionally to sniff at corners or baseboards. He seemed strangely at home here, as though following a scent trail only he could detect. "Dad, look," Emma's voice echoed from what appeared to be a small library off the main living room. "There are still books here." The library was in better condition than the rest of the house, protected perhaps by its interior location. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined three walls, many still filled with leather-bound volumes. A desk stood beneath the room's single window, papers scattered across its surface as though abandoned mid-task. "Be careful what you touch, Em. This place hasn't been properly lived in for decades." A sudden thud from the kitchen startled them both. Matthew moved quickly, protective instinct overriding caution. He found Rusty standing in the center of the kitchen, tail-wagging, eyes fixed on a section of wall near what remained of the cabinets. "What is it, boy?" Matthew approached as Rusty pawed at the baseboard, whining softly. The kitchen was a disaster. Water damage had warped the floor, cabinet doors hung from single hinges, and what remained of the ancient appliances would be better suited for a museum than cooking. But Rusty's focus was unwavering, his nose pressed against a section of wall that appeared slightly different from its surroundings. Matthew knelt, running his hand along the baseboard where Rusty indicated. The paneling felt newer, the wood a slightly different shade. His contractor's instinct kicked in. This section had been replaced and relatively recently compared to the rest of the house. Dad, the floors upstairs are super creaky, but I think we can sleep in the bedrooms. The roof doesn't leak in the back rooms. Emma's voice carried down the stairs. Matthew straightened, making a mental note to examine the kitchen wall more closely later. Don't go exploring alone, Em. This place isn't safe. They spent the remainder of the afternoon taking stock of what they had inherited. The rear portion of the second floor remained structurally sound, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, with fixtures from the 1950s that hadn't seen water in years. The first floor had water damage throughout, but the foundation appeared solid. The collapsed section of roof was confined to the attic above the front rooms. We can make this work for now. Matthew decided, bringing in sleeping bags and supplies from the truck. Just until I figure out what to do with the place. Emma's enthusiasm hadn't dimmed. She claimed the smaller of the 2 usable bedrooms, was immediately setting up her stuffed animals, as though this were a camping adventure rather than last resort housing. Dad, this place must have been amazing when it was new. Can you fix it like you fixed Mrs. Abernathy's Victorian? The one with the gingerbread trim. Matthew felt a pang at the memory. The Abernathy restoration had been one of his showcase projects featured in regional magazines. Before the recession hit, before clients stopped paying, before everything collapsed around him like the roof of this house. That would take money we don't have, kiddo. For now, we're just making it livable. As dusk settled, they ate sandwiches by lantern light in the library, the least damaged room on the first floor. Rusty lay nearby, still oddly alert, his attention repeatedly drawn to different parts of the house. He's acting weird, Emma observed, watching the dog's ears twitch at sounds only he could hear. Maybe he knows something we don't. Maybe he's just excited to have more space than the apartment. The apartment they'd moved to after the divorce had barely allowed pets, with the landlord making an exception only because Rusty was practically a senior citizen. After dinner, Emma wandered to the built-in bookshelves, pulling out volumes at random. These are really old, Dad. Look, this one's from 1903. She handled a leather-bound book carefully, its pages yellowed but intact. Matthew crossed the room to examine it, a history of the county, with handwritten notes in the margins. The tight, precise script noted corrections or additions to the text. Someone had been a careful reader. Probably your great-grandfather's, Matthew said. He was supposed to be quite the local historian. The house grew darker, the shadows deeper. Matthew set up their sleeping bags in the library, deciding it was safer than risking the upstairs rooms on their first night. Emma drifted to sleep quickly, the excitement of the day catching up with her. Matthew sat awake longer, making notes by lantern light, materials needed urgent repairs, costs he couldn't afford. Sleep came fitfully broken by the strange sounds of the unfamiliar house, the creak of settling wood, the scurry of what were certainly mice in the walls, the occasional distant drip of water finding its way through the damaged roof. Sometime past midnight, he woke to find Rusty gone from his side. Matthew rose quietly, careful not to wake Emma. With flashlight in hand, he followed the sound of scratching to the kitchen. Rusty stood at the same section of wall, pawing with greater urgency, now whining softly. What's got into you? Matthew knelt beside the dog, examining the wall more carefully in the beam of his flashlight. The section was definitely newer than its surroundings, perhaps 30 or 40 years old compared to the century-plus age of the house. Running his fingers along the edge, Matthew felt a slight gap. Something about the dimensions wasn't right. The wall seemed thicker here than it should be. His contractor's instinct took over. He retrieved tools from his truck and carefully pried at the baseboard. It came away surprisingly easily, revealing a narrow cavity behind. Rusty's excitement grew, his tail wagging furiously as Matthew worked. The hidden compartment was shallow but extended upward within the wall. Matthew reached in his fingers, finding something smooth and rectangular, an envelope, yellowed with age but sealed. He withdrew it carefully, holding it in the flashlight beam. No name marked its surface, just a date, October 17, 1961. The seal cracked easily. After all these years, the glue long since dried out. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting faded but legible. The debt is settled. The house returns to its rightful guardian. May they forgive what we could not repay. The note was signed simply A.N. No full name, no explanation. Matthew turned the paper over looking for more, but the reverse was blank. What debt? What forgiveness? The cryptic message raised more questions than it answered. Rusty nosed at the cavity again, but Matthew's further exploration revealed nothing else hidden within. He replaced the baseboard, loosely making a mental note to examine the wall more thoroughly in daylight. The note went into his pocket, a mystery for tomorrow. Morning brought a different perspective on their inheritance. Sunlight revealed both the extent of the damage and, paradoxically, the potential that remained. Behind the decay, the house's bones were strong, its architecture graceful. The woodwork that remained undamaged showed expert craftsmanship, dovetail joints in the cabinets, hand-carved details in the banister. Emma was up early, already exploring again with the fearlessness of youth. "Dad, come see what I found." She had pulled away a section of peeling wallpaper in what must have been a small sitting room, revealing a child's drawing underneath. In crayon, still vibrant after decades, someone had drawn a simple picture of the house with stick figures standing in front. "Home Forever" was written in childish letters with the date 1962 beneath it. "Someone wrote on the wall and got it covered up," Emma said with a hint of satisfaction, as though uncovering evidence of another child's mischief. Matthew examined the drawing. The wallpaper above it was clearly older than the section covering the drawing. This hadn't been an attempt to hide a child's transgression. Someone had deliberately preserved the drawing before covering it with new paper. "I don't think they were hiding it, Em. I think they were protecting it." They spent the morning exploring, further cataloging damages and discovering small treasures, a collection of antique marbles in a bedroom drawer, a cache of old coins and a tarnished tin photographs in tattered albums showing the house in its prime. In one, a stern-faced man stood on the porch, flanked by a woman and two children. Written on the bion, "James Reynolds with family, 1952. "That's your great-grandfather," Matthew told Emma, "and this would have been his son, my father as a boy." The connection felt strange, almost intrusive. Matthew had never known his grandfather. His father had left Oakwood Heights young and never returned, never spoke of his childhood home. Whatever had happened here had been enough to sever family ties completely. By midday, hunger drove them into town. The main street of Oakwood Heights stretched 6 blocks lined with brick buildings from the early 1900s. Some thrived: the hardware store, the diner, the bank. Others had succumbed to changing times. Their windows papered over, their signs faded. Rusty waited in the truck as they entered Carson's Diner, a chrome and vinyl establishment that looked unchanged since the 1950s. Conversation dimmed noticeably as they entered, heads turning to track their progress to a booth by the window. The scrutiny wasn't subtle. "People are staring," Emma whispered, sliding into the booth. "Small towns have long memories," Matthew replied, keeping his voice low. "And the Reynolds name comes with history here." A waitress approached, older, with steel-gray hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Matthew thoroughly before speaking. "You'd be James Reynolds' grandson, then, the one who got the old house." It wasn't a question. Matthew nodded, accepting menus from her. "Matthew Reynolds, and this is my daughter, Emma." "Margaret Wilson," she offered, a thin smile. "Knew your grandfather. Stubborn man, but fair. House has stood empty too long." She glanced at Emma. "You look like the Reynolds side. Same eyes." Before Matthew could respond, an older man from a nearby booth leaned over. "That house belonged to the Nortons before they lost everything. Your grandfather was just the banker who took it." The accusation hung in the air, sharp-edged. Margaret's expression hardened. "Richard Harrison, mind your business. That's not how it happened, and you know it. I know William Norton built that house with his own hands before the bank took it." Harrison's weathered face creased with old anger. "Reynolds just happened to be the one holding the note." Matthew kept his expression neutral, though the exchange confirmed his suspicion that the house came with more baggage than just physical decay. "I'm just trying to make it livable." "Good luck with that." Harrison turned back to his coffee. "City boy playing handyman. That'll end well." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. Some people nurse grudges like fine wine." She took their order and moved away, but the atmosphere in the diner remained charged, conversations resuming in low murmurs. Dad, why don't people like us? Emma asked, her voice small. Not us specifically. Matthew chose his words carefully. There's history here I don't fully understand yet. Old disagreements that happened before either of us was born. They ate quickly, aware of the occasional glances their way. As they were leaving, a heavy-set man in a work shirt, an official-looking windbreaker, entered, stopping abruptly when he saw Matthew. You the one moving into the old Reynolds place? His tone made it clear this wasn't a friendly inquiry. I inherited it, Matthew Reynolds. Frank Cooper County Building Inspector. He didn't offer his hand. That property's been on our watch list for years. Violation notices have been piling up since your grandfather passed. Structure's unsafe potential hazard to the community. Matthew straightened, professional instinct taking over. I'm a licensed contractor. I'm aware of the issues and planning to address them. Cooper's eyebrows rose slightly. Licensed here in Oakwood County. Not yet. I just arrived yesterday. Then you're not a contractor here, are you? Cooper's smile didn't reach his eyes. You've got 60 days to bring that place up to code or the county condemns it. Paperwork's already being processed. I'll be by tomorrow with the official notice. Matthew felt a flash of anger but kept his voice level. I understand code requirements. I'll have a plan ready when you come by. See that you do. Cooper's gaze shifted to Emma, his expression softening slightly. No children should be in that structure as it stands. Not safe. He moved past them to the counter, conversation clearly finished. Matthew guided Emma outside his mind, racing through calculations, materials, labor permits, all expenses he couldn't afford. Are they going to take the house away? Emma asked as they reached the truck. No, we're going to fix it. The determination in his voice surprised even him. 24 hours ago, he'd seen the house as an unwanted burden, a final mockery from fate. Now, with people expecting him to fail, something hardened within him. We're going to show them what Reynoldses can do. Back at the house, Matthew found himself examining it with new eyes, not just as an inherited problem, but as a project, a challenge. He'd built his reputation on restoration work before expanding too quickly, taking risks that ultimately sank him when the economy turned. This wasn't so different from projects he'd successfully completed, just with the added complication of non-existent funds. While Emma explored the grounds with Rusty, Matthew retrieved the hidden letter from his pocket, reading it again in daylight. The debt is settled. The house returns to its rightful guardian. What debt, between whom and who was A.N.? The initials niggled at his memory. Norton, the name Harrison had mentioned in the diner. That house belonged to the Nortons before they lost everything. A.N. could be a Norton, but which one? And what did the cryptic message mean, Dad? Rusty found something else, Emma's voice carried from the library. Matthew found them by the bookcase, Emma kneeling beside Rusty as the dog pawed at the lower section of the built-in shelving. Unlike the kitchen wall, nothing here appeared obviously different or newer. He keeps scratching right here. Emma pointed to a decorative panel below the lowest shelf. Matthew examined it more closely. The panel featured carved molding, consistent with the rest of the library's woodwork. But as he ran his fingers along its edge, he felt a slight irregularity, a gap that shouldn't be there if the panel were purely decorative. Stand back a bit, he instructed Emma, pulling a small pocket knife from his jeans. He pressed the blade gently into the gap, feeling for resistance. Instead, the knife slipped in easily, and when he applied the slight pressure, there was a soft click. The panel swung outward, revealing a hidden compartment about 2 feet square. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its surface cracked with age but still intact. A secret hiding place. I knew this house would have one. Emma's excitement was palpable as Matthew carefully removed the book. It was a journal, the pages yellowed, but the handwriting clear and precise. Dates ran from 1959 to 1961, chronicling business transactions between James Reynolds and the Norton family. As Matthew skimmed the entries, a picture emerged. Loans made during hard times, agreements about interest and payments, notes about the Norton family's struggles with their lumber business. Listen to this, Matthew read aloud from an entry dated March 1960. William Norton requested another extension today. Lumber prices continue to fall and the mill operates at a loss. I've agreed to 3 months additional time with the property as continued collateral. The man has 3 children to feed and pride won't fill their bellies. Further entries documented the deteriorating financial situation. By November 1960, the tone had changed. Norton missed the third payment. By rights, I could foreclose now, but Christmas approaches, and I'll not have children homeless for the holiday. Extension granted until February. The final entry, dated April 1961, was brief. The matter is settled. God grant that it was done right, though I fear the cost to both families may prove higher than the debt itself. Between the last pages of the journal lay a pressed flower, a maple leaf, its color still faintly visible after decades. Attached to it was a small note card bearing elegant handwriting, different from the journal's from Clara. Remember our promise, beneath the old maple. Who's Clara? Emma asked, peering at the delicate writing. I don't know. Matthew carefully returned the pressed leaf to its place. The journal revealed a more complicated story than Harrison's bitter accusation at the diner. His grandfather hadn't been a heartless banker seizing property at the first opportunity. He'd extended multiple opportunities for the Nortons to repay their debt. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, Matthew saw a black luxury SUV pull up in front of the house, its polished surface incongruous against the deteriorating property. A man in his late 50s emerged dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Matthew's truck. Two younger men in work clothes followed their expressions, neutral, professionally blank. Stay inside with Rusty, Matthew instructed Emma, tucking the journal into his back pocket as he headed for the door. The suited man stood examining the house with a proprietary air, hands clasped behind his back. His salt and pepper hair was expensively cut, his posture that of someone accustomed to authority. He turned as Matthew approached, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Matthew Reynolds, I presume Edward Norton. I believe we have matters to discuss. The name clicked immediately. Norton, the family, mentioned in the diner in the journal. A.N., could this man be related to the author of the hidden letter? What matters would those be? Matthew kept his tone neutral, though something about Norton's manner set his teeth on edge. The matter of this property, of course. Norton gestured expansively toward the house. There seems to be some confusion about ownership that I'd like to clear up promptly. Matthew crossed his arms. No confusion. I inherited it legally from my grandfather, James Reynolds. The deed transferred to me after his death. Norton's smile thinned. Ah, but therein lies the misunderstanding. You see, this property rightfully belongs to the Norton family. Your grandfather was merely holding it temporarily. That's not what the county records show. Records can be incomplete or misinterpreted. Norton withdrew a folder from inside his jacket, removing a document protected in a plastic sleeve. This certificate from 1985 clearly shows the property was reclaimed by my father, Arthur Norton, following a legal review of the original arrangement with your grandfather. Matthew examined the document carefully. It appeared official at first glance, letterhead from the county clerk's office, stamps and signatures in the appropriate places. The text stated that after review, the property transfer of 1961 was deemed contingent and temporary and had reverted to Norton ownership in 1985. At 1985. Interesting timing, Matthew observed. My grandfather died in 19 Something flickered in Norton's eyes, annoyance perhaps, or caution. The legal review was already underway before his passing. His death merely simplified the process. I'm sure it did. Matthew handed the document back. Unfortunately for you, I have the current deed transferred legally to me as his heir. Whatever this certificate claims, the county recognizes me as the owner. Norton's expression hardened. For now, but I think you'll find that situation changing shortly. He nodded to the men who had accompanied him. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd stop making unauthorized modifications to Norton property. Johnson Davis, remove any tools or materials this gentleman has brought onto the premises. The men moved toward Matthew's truck, where his tools were still stored in the bed covered with a tarp. Touch my property and we're going to have a problem. Matthew stepped forward, blocking their path. Both men were younger, probably stronger, but Matthew had the solid build of someone who'd worked construction his entire adult life. I'd reconsider your position, Norton advised coolly. You're outnumbered, and from what I understand, your financial situation doesn't allow for replacing equipment or legal fees. The implied threat hung in the air. Matthew held his ground. Funny thing about being at rock bottom, not much left to lose. Makes a man less inclined to back down. The standoff stretched tension, thickening the air. From inside the house came a low, continuous growl as Rusty sensed the confrontation. Through the window, Matthew caught a glimpse of Emma's worried face pressed against the glass. One of the men, Johnson or Davis, Matthew hadn't caught, which took a step forward. "Just move aside, man. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not the one making anything hard." Matthew didn't budge. "You're on my property threatening to take my possessions. In some states, that would justify significant force in response." The men exchanged glances, clearly weighing whether the confrontation was worth escalating. Norton's jaw tightened in irritation. "Stand down," he instructed them abruptly. "We'll resolve this properly through legal channels." He turned back to Matthew. "I came here as a courtesy Reynolds. I could have simply sent the sheriff with an eviction notice. The offer still stands: vacate the property voluntarily, and we can discuss reasonable compensation for your inconvenience." "I'm not going anywhere." Matthew's voice was quiet but firm. "This house belonged to my grandfather, and now it belongs to me. Whatever claim you think you have can be addressed in court." Norton's smile returned, colder than before. "As you wish. But I should warn you, I have considerably more resources to devote to legal proceedings than you do. A protracted battle will only delay the inevitable and drain what little you have left. Then I guess I'll have to be efficient about proving you wrong." Norton stared at him for a long moment, then turned away with a dismissive gesture. "We'll be in touch, soon." He returned to his SUV, the workers following without further comment. As the vehicle pulled away, Matthew felt the tension drain from his shoulders, as replaced by a cold certainty that this confrontation was only the beginning. Norton had resources, connections, and apparently documentation, albeit suspicious, to support his claim. Emma burst through the front door, Rusty at her heels. "Dad, I heard everything." "Is that man going to take our house?" Matthew knelt to her level, meeting her worried gaze. "No, he's not. He may think he can push us around because we're down on our luck, but he's wrong." He glanced up at the house, its weathered facade suddenly more precious than it had been an hour ago. "This is ours, and we're going to fight for it." Emma's expression shifted from worry to determination, mirroring his own. "What do we do first?" "First, we make this place livable." Matthew rose, mind already calculating priorities. "If the county's threatening condemnation, we start with structural issues. Shore up that section of roof, reinforce the porch, address any electrical or plumbing hazards." "Can we do all that in 60 days, just as—" Matthew hesitated. The honest answer was probably not without money for materials, not without help. But the alternative was surrender, and he'd done enough of that in the past year. "We'll find a way. Reynolds has built this house once. We can save it now." Inside, Matthew spread the journal on the library desk, reading more carefully through the entries. The financial arrangement between James Reynolds and William Norton became clearer: a series of loans to keep the Norton lumber mill operating during an industry downturn, with the house and property used as collateral. By April 1961, the debt had apparently become unsustainable. But something about the final entry nagged at him. "The matter is settled. God grant that it was done right, though I fear the cost to both families may prove higher than the debt itself." Not the words of someone simply foreclosing on property. There was regret there, perhaps even guilt. The pressed maple leaf and Clara's note added another layer of mystery. "Remember our promise," beneath the old maple. What promise? Between whom Matthew tried to piece together a timeline. The loans from 1959 to 1961, the cryptic note hidden in the wall dated October 1961, the child's drawing from 1962. A bark from outside interrupted his thoughts. Through the window, he saw Rusty circling a massive maple tree at the edge of the overgrown yard, tail wagging excitedly. The tree must have been ancient, its trunk at least 4 feet in diameter, its canopy spreading wide above the property. "The old maple," Matthew murmured, remembering Clara's note. He joined Rusty outside, examining the tree more closely. The bark was deeply furrowed with age, but as he circled it, he noticed something unusual. A section where the pattern changed slightly, as though the bark had grown over something embedded in the trunk decades ago. Emma appeared at his side. "What's Rusty found now?" "Not sure yet." Matthew ran his fingers over the irregular section. "But I think people have been leaving messages for each other around this house for a long time." He returned to more immediate concerns, assessing the structural damage, cataloging needed repairs, planning a defense against both Norton's claim and the county's condemnation threat. The next day would bring the official violation notice from Inspector Cooper. Matthew needed to be ready to show progress to buy time. As dusk fell, Emma helped him clear debris from the most damaged areas. She worked without complaint, her small hands steady as she sorted salvageable materials from rubbish. The practical task seemed to ease her worry about Norton's threats. Dad, she paused, a piece of broken molding in her hands. Are we going to live here now? For real? Matthew considered the question carefully. 24 hours ago, his plan had been to make minimal repairs and sell the property if anyone would buy it. Now, with Norton's claim complicating matters, selling wasn't an immediate option. And something had shifted in him during the confrontation, a sense of connection to this place he hadn't expected to feel. For now, yes, at least until we sort out Mr. Norton's claim and get the house into better shape. I think I'd like that. It feels like we're supposed to be here. Does that sound weird? Not weird at all. Matthew looked around at the grand old house, seeing past the decay to what it had been, what it could be again. I'm starting to feel the same way. That night, as Emma slept, Matthew returned to the kitchen, where Rusty had first discovered the hidden compartment. The baseboard came away easily this time, revealing the cavity within. His flashlight beam showed that the space extended further up inside the wall than he'd initially thought. Carefully, he removed more of the newer paneling, exposing a larger section of the cavity. Behind the first envelope was another, this one water-damaged and partially disintegrated. The paper inside had fared better, protected by its covering. It appeared to be part of a letter, the beginning and end missing. The surviving fragment read, "Cannot continue this deception. The agreement was made in good faith, but the terms have become impossible to maintain. James understands the position we are in and has offered a solution that preserves dignity for all concerned. The house will transfer legally, but with the understanding that..." The rest was lost to water damage, the ink blurred beyond recognition. Matthew sat back on his heels, piecing together what he could. Some kind of agreement between his grandfather and the Nortons involving the house, but more complicated than a simple foreclosure. The hidden notes, the journal entries, Clara's pressed maple leaf, all pointed to a story more nuanced than either Harrison's bitter accusation or Norton's confident claim. He carefully stored both fragments, with the journal mind turning over possibilities. Tomorrow would bring Cooper, with his violation notice and likely more pressure from Norton. Matthew needed allies' information and resources, all in short supply for a bankrupt contractor with a damaged reputation. But he also had something neither Cooper nor Norton expected: the stubborn determination of a man with nothing left to lose. The house might be broken, but it wasn't beyond saving. His life had collapsed around him, his business, his marriage, his sense of self. But here, in this unexpected inheritance, he'd found something worth fighting for. As Matthew finally prepared for sleep, Rusty curled beside him on the library floor. He felt a strange sense of coming home, not to a place he knew, but to a battle he understood. The restoration of broken things had been his livelihood before failure struck. Perhaps saving this house could be the first step toward rebuilding everything else. Through the window, the ancient maple stood silhouetted against the night sky, its branches spread like protective arms over the property. Somewhere beneath it lay answers to Norton's claim, to his grandfather's regret, to the mysterious promise made decades ago. Tomorrow he would begin searching for them. But tonight, in the quiet of the deteriorating house, with his daughter sleeping peacefully nearby and his faithful dog at his side, Matthew Reynolds made a silent commitment to the walls around him. "I will not be the Reynolds who loses this house again." A month into their residence at the old Reynolds house, Matthew stood on the newly reinforced porch, surveying his progress. The collapsed section of roof had been temporarily patched, preventing further water damage. He'd replaced the most dangerous floor sections, stripped rotted wood from the porch supports, and reinforced the sagging foundation on the east side. The work had been grueling, made possible only through scavenged materials and creative reuse of what the house itself provided. The county inspector, Cooper, had reluctantly acknowledged the improvements, though his expression suggested he'd expected, perhaps hoped for, failure. The official violation notice now hung in Matthew's makeshift office, a checklist of code requirements with unreasonable timelines. Each item Matthew addressed was met with new citations, moving targets that stretched his limited resources to breaking point. "It's looking better every day." Margaret Wilson's voice carried from the walkway, where she approached with a paper bag in hand. The older woman had become an unexpected ally, appearing regularly with home-cooked meals and local gossip. Brought you some meatloaf. Growing girl needs protein. Emma had charmed Margaret immediately, their shared fascination with the house's history, creating a bond that transcended generations. She's over by the maple with Jack. They're measuring for new supports. Jack Wilson, Margaret's grandson, had appeared a week into the renovations, toolkit in hand, and no explanation beyond, "Grandma says you could use help." A master carpenter in his 30s, Jack worked for what Matthew could afford, which some days meant nothing but a shared meal. His assistance had been invaluable, his knowledge of traditional building techniques matching Matthew's modern construction experience. Matthew accepted the food gratefully. Financial reality had settled in, hard his savings nearly depleted, odd jobs in town, barely covering essentials. The renovation progressed in fits and starts dependent on what materials they could salvage or what neighbors occasionally contributed. Norton's been asking questions around town. Margaret didn't waste time with preambles. "About your grandfather, about the property transfer." "He's digging." Matthew had expected as much. Norton's initial threat of legal action had materialized as a formal letter demanding he vacate the premises, claiming the 1980 certificate trumped Matthew's inherited deed. Matthew's response had been simple and direct, a refusal delivered through the mail slot of Norton's downtown office. "Let him dig. The truth should help our case, not his." Margaret's expression suggested she wasn't convinced. Truth gets murky after 60 years. People remember what suits them. She nodded toward the massive maple tree where Emma laughed at something Jack had said. "That tree's seen it all, though. Been standing since before my time." The ancient maple had become Emma's favorite spot on the property. She spent hours beneath its spreading branches, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the wind stir its leaves. Rusty inevitably joined her, the dog's strange fascination with the tree undiminished since their arrival. "The tree keeps coming up in the documents we found," Matthew admitted. "Something about a promise made beneath it." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "Clara Norton's promise, most likely. She and your grandfather were close before everything fell apart." The name struck Matthew like a physical blow. Clara Norton, the pressed flower in the journal, had been signed Clara, a connection between his grandfather and the Nortons beyond financial transactions. What kind of close? Margaret glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers despite the isolation of the property. The kind people whispered about but never said aloud. She was William Norton's wife, Edward's mother. The rumor was she and your grandfather had feelings for each other long before either married. Nothing ever came of it, far as anyone knows. The revelation added another layer to the mystery. A personal connection between the families complicated the narrative Edward Norton had presented of a banker simply foreclosing on property. Does Edward know about his mother and your grandfather? Doubtful. William Norton wasn't a man who'd discuss such things, especially with his son. After the property changed hands, the Nortons left town for nearly a decade. When they returned, William was dead, Clara withdrawn. Edward had that chip on his shoulder already, Harvard education and big city ambitions. Margaret left soon after, leaving Matthew with new questions and the lingering scent of home-cooked food. He joined Emma and Jack by the maple, where they had rigged a temporary support for a low-hanging branch damaged in a recent storm. "Dad, Jack says we should check the property markers. He thinks they might not match the current records." Emma's face glowed with the excitement of mystery solving. At 10, she viewed their situation as an adventure rather than a crisis, a perspective Matthew increasingly valued. Jack nodded, his weathered face serious beneath his carpenter's cap. County maps from the 80s show different boundaries than older surveys. If Norton's using current records to support his claim, that's something to look into. The suggestion had merit. Property line discrepancies could undermine Norton's claim, particularly if the changes occurred around the suspicious 1985 certificate. "Good idea. I'll check with the county records office tomorrow." Matthew ran his hand along the maple's massive trunk, feeling the irregular section where something seemed embedded beneath the bark. "This tree keeps coming up in the documents. Your grandmother mentioned Clara Norton, and my grandfather had some connection to it." Jack's expression shifted subtly. "Grandma talks too much sometimes. But yeah, there are stories. Before my time, though." The following morning, Matthew left Emma with Margaret and drove to the county seat 30 miles away. The records office occupied the basement of the administrative building, a fluorescent-lit maze of filing cabinets and computer terminals. A board clerk directed him to the property records section without looking up from her magazine. The process proved more challenging than anticipated. Computer records went back only to the mid-1990s. Earlier documents were stored in bound volumes organized by township and year. Matthew spent hours poring over dusty records tracing the history of the Reynolds property through decades of changes. The discrepancy emerged in comparing surveys from 1961 and 1980. The earlier documents showed the property line extending 50 yards beyond the maple tree, encompassing a small stream and additional acreage. The 1985 survey moved the boundary to the tree itself, reducing the property's size by nearly an acre. More troubling were the signatures on the 1985 survey. The county clerk's name was one he'd seen mentioned in his research, Raymond Red Stamp, who'd been forced to resign following allegations of falsifying records. The discovery reinforced Matthew's suspicions about the certificate Norton had presented. He made copies of both surveys, noting the official seals and filing dates for comparison. As he was preparing to leave, an older woman approached his table, her expression curious. Finding what you need, her badge identified her as Martha Sullivan, Senior Records Administrator. Matthew explained his search, showing her the discrepancy between surveys. Her eyes narrowed as she examined the documents, lingering on the 1985 survey. "Raymond's work," she murmured. "I wondered if anyone would ever notice." She glanced around before lowering her voice. There was a lot of creative record-keeping in those days, especially involving properties on the edge of what's now the commercial development zone. The revelation caught Matthew's attention immediately. Commercial zone. The Reynolds property is residential well outside the town limits. Martha's smile was knowing. Currently, yes, but the zoning commission is considering an expansion along the North Highway. Properties in that corridor would be reclassified and worth considerably more to developers. The pieces clicked together with sudden clarity. Norton's insistence on reclaiming the property wasn't about family history or righting old wrongs. It was about potential development value. The reduced acreage in the 1985 survey conveniently excluded the riparian rights to the stream, which would have complicated commercial development. Were many records from the 1960s altered during this period? Martha's expression darkened. More than I could prove at the time. Some were misplaced during office renovations. Others had suspicious amendments or replacements. I tried flagging concerns, but, she shrugged. Raymond had powerful friends, including the Norton family. William Norton was gone by then, but his son was rising fast, first law degree, then banking, then local politics. Edward always had ambitions beyond Oakwood Heights. Matthew hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since discovering the altered survey. Is there any way to find original documents that might have been removed from official records? Martha studied him for a long moment, weighing something internally. Officially, no. Those records would be considered lost. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Unofficially, some of us were concerned about the pattern we were seeing. I can't say more except that not everything that disappeared is actively lost. The implication was clear, though frustratingly vague. Martha couldn't or wouldn't directly admit to preserving documents outside official channels. If someone wanted to find these unofficially preserved records, where might they look? I couldn't possibly speculate. Martha straightened, professional demeanor returning. But Oakwood Heights has a historical society. They maintain archives of local history that sometimes include copies of official documents. For historical purposes, of course. The tip was delivered with deliberate casualness, but Matthew recognized it for what it was: a lead. He thanked her and gathered his copies, mind already planning his next steps. The drive back to Oakwood Heights took Matthew past Norton Development's headquarters, a modern glass and steel building that stood out among the town's century-old architecture like a spaceship landed in a historical village. The contrast epitomized Edward Norton's vision for the area progress at the expense of heritage. Matthew's return to the house was met with Emma's enthusiastic account of her day, with Margaret baking cookies, learning to knit, and hearing stories about Oakwood Heights in the olden days. Her integration into small-town life had been seamless, a resilience that sometimes took Matthew by surprise. The divorce had hit her hard. The move from their comfortable suburban home to a cramped apartment had been traumatic. Yet here in this dilapidated house filled with history and mystery, she seemed to flourish. Jack had continued working in Matthew's absence, reinforcing floor joists in the dining room. "Found something interesting," he reported, leading Matthew to a section of wall where he'd removed damaged drywall. Look at the construction technique here, post and beam with mortise and tenon joints. This section is original to the first construction, probably 1890s. But these marks here, he pointed to notches in the beam. These were added later, probably 1950s, when the house was significantly renovated. The craftsmanship was impressive, a reminder of why the structure had survived decades of neglect. Matthew examined the joints more closely, noting the precision of the work. The interesting part, Jack continued, is the initials carved here. He indicated small letters at the base of a support post, WN. William Norton, Matthew murmured. Exactly. He wasn't just living here, he helped rebuild this place. These are craftsman's marks meant to be seen only by other builders, a signature hidden in the bones of the house. The discovery reinforced what Matthew had been piecing together. The relationship between the Norton and Reynolds families was more complex than either Edward Norton's claim or town gossip suggested. William Norton hadn't just been a debtor losing property to a banker, he'd been personally invested in the house itself. Norton's people came by again today. Jack added, his tone casual but his expression serious. Two guys in a company truck taking measurements and photographs from the road. Said they were doing a survey for the utility company, but the truck had Norton Development logos. The news wasn't surprising but added urgency to Matthew's investigations. Norton was preparing for something, perhaps a legal challenge, perhaps more direct action. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Matthew shared his discoveries with Jack over coffee in the kitchen. The altered survey, Martha Sullivan's hints about preserved documents, the zoning commission's planned expansion, all pointed to Norton's true motivation. Makes sense, Jack acknowledged. That stream access would be valuable for commercial development, water rights, drainage, utility easements. If the property boundaries were altered to exclude it, that simplifies the permitting process considerably. But it also means Norton's claim isn't about family history or righting old wrongs. It's about development potential. Jack's expression was grim. Norton plays hardball with properties he wants. Last year, the Simmons farm at the north edge of town had a mysterious barn fire right after they refused his purchase offer. Insurance investigators couldn't prove arson, but everyone knew. The implication sent a chill through Matthew. If Norton was willing to resort to intimidation or worse, their situation was more dangerous than he'd realized. We need to find those original documents Martha hinted at, Matthew decided, and we need to secure the property better, especially at night. Jack nodded, rising to check that doors and windows were properly secured before leaving. I'll ask around about the Historical Society tomorrow, and I'll bring some motion sensor lights from my workshop. Not much, but better than nothing. After Jack departed, Matthew sat alone in the kitchen, reviewing their position. The house improvements were progressing, though too slowly to meet the county's aggressive timeline. Norton's legal threat loomed, backed by resources Matthew couldn't hope to match. And now the possibility of more direct threats had emerged. Yet abandoning the property felt increasingly impossible. It wasn't just shelter anymore, or even an inheritance. It had become a mission, a stand against corruption and intimidation. The mystery of its past had become intertwined with Matthew's sense of purpose, a chance to rebuild not just a house but his own life. Rusty's sudden barking broke through his thoughts. The dog stood at the back door, hackles raised, growling with unusual aggression. Matthew moved quickly, peering through the window into the darkness of the backyard. Nothing moved, but Rusty's behavior suggested otherwise. Matthew grabbed a flashlight and his phone, checking that Emma was still asleep before stepping onto the back porch. The yard lay in shadow, the massive maple, a darker silhouette against the night sky. He played the flashlight beam across the property, searching for whatever had disturbed Rusty. A movement near the edge of the property caught his attention, a flash of light quickly extinguished, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. Someone had been watching the house. Matthew considered calling the sheriff, but hesitated. Without proof of trespassing or threat, a call would likely be dismissed as paranoia. Instead, he made a thorough check of the property's perimeter before returning inside, double-checking locks and windows. The incident reinforced the urgency of Jack's suggestion about security measures. Tomorrow, Matthew would install the motion sensors and consider what other protections they could afford. For tonight, Rusty would serve as their alarm system, his acute senses more reliable than any technology they could deploy. The following days established a new routine. Matthew continued renovations during daylight hours with Jack's help when available. Emma attended school in town, having been enrolled with Margaret's assistance. Afternoons were devoted to research visits to the Historical Society interviews with older residents who might remember the Norton Reynolds history and careful examination of the documents they'd already discovered. The Historical Society proved less helpful than Martha had implied. Its archives were extensive but disorganized, and the elderly volunteer who managed them seemed suspicious of Matthew's interest in property records. He left with only a few newspaper clippings about the Norton lumber mill's financial troubles in the late 1950s, information he already knew from his grandfather's journal. More productive was a conversation with Richard Harrison, the man who had confronted Matthew in the diner. Initially hostile, Harrison warmed slightly when Matthew shared the journal entries showing his grandfather's multiple extensions of the Norton loans. "Doesn't change that a banker took a working man's home," Harrison insisted, though with less venom than before. "William Norton built that house, put his craftsmanship into every beam and board. To lose it over money was all him." He shook his head, the injustice still raw decades later. "The journal suggests there was more to it than a simple foreclosure," Matthew pressed. "Did you know William Norton personally?" Harrison nodded slowly. "Worked at his mill as a young man. He was fair paid, decent wages, even when times got tight. The trouble came when lumber prices collapsed in '59. Mill was losing money every month, but William kept paying workers as long as he could. Borrowed against everything he owned, including the house." "Including the house my grandfather built," Matthew corrected gently. "The original structure dates to the 1890s, built by James Reynolds' father. The Nortons lived there later, after the first renovation." Harrison's brow furrowed. "That's not how William told it. Said his father built that place before the turn of the century." The contradiction added another layer to the property's confused history. Matthew made a mental note to check the earliest available records for the original construction. "What about Clara Norton? Did you know her?" Harrison's expression shifted, a flash of something discomfort, pity crossing his weathered features. "Quiet woman, kept to herself mostly, especially after they lost the house. There were rumors, of course. Small towns run on gossip. Rumors about her and my grandfather." Harrison looked away, suddenly interested in the contents of his coffee cup. "Wasn't my business, then isn't my business now. But I'll say this, when the Nortons returned to Oakwood Heights after years away, Clara went to visit your grandfather. Once a week, regular as clockwork until he died. William was gone by then and people still talked, but she didn't seem to care anymore. The revelation suggested a relationship that had endured despite whatever settlement had transpired in 1961. Matthew thought of the pressed maple leaf, Clara's note about a promise beneath the old tree. What had been promised, and how did it relate to the property transfer? Norton's next move came not through legal channels, but through the local newspaper. A front-page article outlined ambitious development plans for the North Highway corridor, including a shopping complex, office park, and luxury condominiums. A quoted statement from Edward Norton emphasized the economic benefits for Oakwood Heights jobs, increased tax-based modern amenities. Buried in the article's final paragraphs was a mention of resolving outstanding property issues in the target area, including the abandoned Reynolds house, which has fallen into dangerous disrepair. Norton was quoted saying, "We're in discussions with relevant parties to address these concerns and ensure development proceeds smoothly." The public relations strategy was clever, frame Matthew as an obstacle to progress position, Norton as the reasonable businessman seeking community improvement. It shifted the narrative from a property dispute to economic development, placing public opinion pressure on Matthew. The strategy bore immediate fruit. At the hardware store, Matthew encountered cold shoulders, where he'd previously found grudging acceptance. The cashier, who had been friendly the previous week, now barely made eye contact, bagging his purchases in silence. Outside, a group of men blocked his path to the truck. "Heard you're holding up progress," one said, not bothering to hide his hostility. "Town needs those jobs Norton's bringing." Matthew recognized the man, a construction worker who'd been laid off when the recession hit. His anger was understandable if misdirected. "I'm not against development." Matthew kept his voice level, aware of the growing tension. "But Norton's using false documents to claim my property. There are legal processes for purchasing land for development. Forgery and intimidation are not among them." "Fancy words from a city contractor who went bust," another man interjected. "Norton creates jobs. What are you bringing to Oakwood Heights except a tax burden?" The confrontation was escalating, drawing attention from passers-by. Matthew sensed the potential for violence not planned, but born from economic anxiety and manipulated resentment. "I'm bringing the truth," Matthew said quietly. "About altered records, about property lines changed to bypass environmental regulations. Ask yourselves why Norton's so desperate for this specific property that he's willing to forge documents instead of making a fair offer." The men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their expressions. Matthew used the moment to step past them toward his truck, moving deliberately but not rushing. A show of fear would only provoke them further. "This town needs Tuen," the first man called after him. "People won't care about your property rights if their kids are hungry." The warning lingered as Matthew drove away. Norton was playing a longer game than he'd anticipated, leveraging economic desperation to build community pressure. It was a strategy that could be more effective than legal challenges, particularly in a town still recovering from recession. That night, Matthew woke to the sound of breaking glass. He was moving before fully conscious, grabbing the baseball bat he'd started keeping beside his mattress. Rusty's barking echoed through the house, followed by Emma's frightened call. "Dad, someone's outside." Matthew found her in the hallway, eyes wide with fear. "Stay in your room, lock the door. Don't come out until I call you." The sound had come from the library, a window shattered by a rock wrapped in paper. Outside, Matthew caught a glimpse of retreating figures, at least 3 of them, running toward a waiting vehicle. The motion sensor lights Jack had installed flared to life too late to identify the vandals. Matthew unwrapped the paper from the rock, finding a crude message, "Sell or burn." The threat was explicit enough to justify calling the sheriff. Deputy Collins arrived 20 minutes later, taking photographs and notes with professional detachment. His questions were perfunctory, his demeanor suggesting he viewed the incident as low priority. "Probably just kids," he concluded, despite the specific threat. "I'll file a report, but without witnesses or evidence pointing to specific individuals." The implication was clear: nothing would come of the investigation. Matthew wasn't surprised. Norton's influence likely extended to local law enforcement. This happened right after Norton published his development plans. Matthew pointed out, the timing seemed significant. Deputy Collins' expression didn't change. "Lots of people in town excited about those plans. Could be anyone who thinks you're standing in the way of progress." After the deputy left, Matthew reinforced the broken window with plywood mind, racing through options. The vandalism marked an escalation from legal threats to property damage. The next step could be more dangerous. Jack arrived early the next morning, concern evident in his expression, when Matthew explained what had happened. "Norton's playing dirty," he concluded, "using the development announcement to stir up sentiment, then letting things take their natural course. He keeps his hands clean while the community does his dirty work." "We need to accelerate our timeline," Matthew decided. The Historical Society was a dead end, but there must be other sources for the original documents. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "There's someone else we could train, Samuel Peters. He worked in the county records office with Martha Sullivan during the Norton years. Retired now, lives out by the lake. Bit of a recluse, doesn't talk to many people." "Why didn't you mention him before?" "Because he doesn't talk to many people," Jack repeated, emphasis making his point clear. "And because he had some issues after the record scandal. Drinking paranoia, claims the Nortons had him blacklisted from government work. People wrote him off as a conspiracy theorist." Matthew considered this. A potentially unreliable witness was still better than no witness at all. "Can you arrange an introduction?" Jack nodded reluctantly. "I do some maintenance on his cabin occasionally. No promises, but I'll try." While Jack contacted Peters, Matthew focused on securing the house against further vandalism. He installed the remaining motion sensors Jack had provided, reinforced vulnerable windows, and established a rotation of nighttime checks. Emma's a school principal they had called that morning, reporting that she'd been involved in an altercation with classmates who'd repeated their parents' criticisms of the man blocking jobs. The divide in town was affecting her directly now. 2 days later, Jack reported success. Samuel Peters had agreed to meet them, though he'd insisted on neutral territory, a fishing spot at the lake away from potential observation. They found Peters sitting on a weathered dock, fishing rod in hand, though no tackle disturbed the water's surface. In his 70s, with a thatch of white hair and deeply lined face, he had the wary eyes of someone accustomed to disappointment. Jack says you're having Norton problems. He began without preamble when they settled beside him. Join the club. That family's been manipulating Oakwood Heights for 3 generations. Matthew explained their situation, the inherited property, Norton's claim based on the 1985 certificate, the recent escalation to vandalism and threats. Peters listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as though confirming private suspicions. That certificate is a fraud, he stated when Matthew finished. I remember when it was created. Not officially, of course, off the books after hours. Raymond handled it personally, but I saw the document on his desk. Brand new paper aged with T-signature, practiced until he could mimic the previous clerk's handwriting. The confirmation of fraud was valuable, but Matthews knew it wouldn't be enough in court. Can you testify to this? Peters laughed, a harsh sound without humor. My word against Norton's with my history of mental health issues, I'd be laughed out of court. He shook his head. Besides, that's not what you really need. The certificate is just a symptom. The disease is deeper. What do you mean? Peters set his fishing rod aside, turning to face Matthew directly. The property transfer in 1961 wasn't a simple foreclosure. There was an agreement between James Reynolds and William Norton, something they arranged privately with terms beyond the financial. When Norton's son returned years later and discovered the arrangement, he systematically erased the evidence. What kind of agreement? That's what Norton doesn't want found. The original transfer documents included covenants conditions that would allow the Norton family to reclaim the property under specific circumstances, but also conditions that would permanently secure Reynolds' ownership if certain events occurred. The vague description was frustrating. Do you know what these conditions were? Peter shook his head. The details were in the original deed transfer, which conveniently disappeared from county records in 1985. But I know someone made copies. Martha Sullivan, Matthew guessed. Martha was careful. She kept a separate archive of documents she suspected might be tampered with, not in the records office, not at her home. Somewhere no one would think to look. Peters glanced toward the shoreline, checking they were still alone. She called it her insurance policy against Norton's influence. Where is this archive now? Peters smiled thinly. That's the question, isn't it? Martha never told me directly. Said it was safer if fewer people knew. But she left clues for those who might need the information someday. Matthew fought growing frustration. More hints, more mysteries, but still no concrete evidence to counter Norton's claim. What clues? Martha was a history buff fascinated by the Underground Railroad routes through this area. She often said the best places to hide things were those that had already proven their worth as hiding places. Peters rose stiffly, collecting his fishing gear. That's all I know, or all I'm willing to say to someone I just met. Norton has ears everywhere. The cryptic reference to the Underground Railroad nagged at Matthew as they drove back to town. Oakwood Heights had indeed been a way station for escaping enslaved people before the Civil War, with several documented safe houses in the area. Could Martha have hidden documents in one of these historical locations? Jack seemed equally puzzled. The nearest documented station was the old Miller farm, but that was demolished for the highway expansion 20 years ago. Unless, he trailed off expression, thoughtful. Unless what? There were rumors about your house, the Reynolds place. Nothing documented, but old stories about hidden rooms, concealed passages. Could be nothing but local legend, or Martha hid the documents in a house already known for hiding people. Matthew finished. The theory had merit, though it raised a troubling question. If such hiding places existed in the house, why hadn't they found them during their renovations? The answer came to him suddenly. We've been focusing on the damaged areas, the obvious repairs. If there are hidden spaces, they'd be in the structurally sound sections, the parts we haven't needed to touch. Back at the house, they found Emma and Rusty beneath the maple tree, the girl reading while the dog dozed beside her. She looked up as they approached, her expression brightening. Dad, I found something weird on the tree. She pointed to the section of trunk where the bark pattern changed. I was leaning against it, and it felt different, so I looked closer. There's something carved under the bark, but it's grown over. Matthew examined the area more carefully than he had before. The irregular pattern did suggest something embedded in the trunk, gradually enveloped as the tree grew. Using his pocket knife, he carefully scraped away a thin layer of bark, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a metal plaque. Further careful excavation exposed a small bronze marker, its surface green with age, but its inscription still legible. R plus N 1961. Below these cryptic letters and date was a symbol, a five-pointed star with a small circle at its center. "What does it mean?" Emma asked, tracing the symbol with her finger. Jack leaned closer, expression suddenly intent. "That's a surveyor's mark. Old style, not used much anymore. It indicates a property marker, but the symbol." He straightened, excitement visible in his usually calm demeanor. "That specific star and circle was used to mark boundaries with special conditions or covenants. This isn't just a property line, it's marking something in the deed itself." The discovery aligned with Peter's mention of covenants in the original transfer conditions beyond simple ownership. Matthew photographed the marker carefully, then covered it again to protect it from weather or tampering. "We need to find that original deed," he decided. "If Martha hid documents in the house, we need to search every inch, especially areas that might have served as hiding places during the Underground Railroad era." They spent the remainder of the day examining the house with new purpose, searching for inconsistencies in wall dimensions, unusual features in the foundation, anything that might indicate hidden spaces. By nightfall, they had identified several possibilities. A section of basement wall that sounded hollow when tapped, a pantry with dimensions that didn't match the external measurements, a curious gap beneath the main staircase. "Tomorrow we'll investigate each systematically," Matthew planned. "If there are documents hidden here, we'll find them." That night, exhausted but hopeful, Matthew checked the house's security one final time before sleep. The motion sensors were armed, windows and doors secured. Rusty lay alert by the front door, his protective instincts heightened since the vandalism incident. Despite these precautions, Matthew felt uneasy. Norton's campaign was escalating from legal threats to public pressure to property damage. What would come next, and how much time did they have before the next move? The answer came at 3 in the morning when Rusty's frantic barking jolted Matthew from sleep. The smell hit him immediately. Smoke, acrid and threatening, seeping under his bedroom door. Fire. Matthew's training took over. Check the door for heat, stay low. Move quickly, but cautiously. The hallway was clear, though smoke curled up the stairwell from the first floor. Emma's room was his first priority. She was already awake, coughing in the thickening smoke. "Dad? What's happening?" "Fire downstairs. We need to get out." He grabbed her emergency bag packed after the vandalism incident and guided her toward the back stairs away from the worst of the smoke. "Stay low. Breathe through your shirt." Rusty met them at the bottom of the stairs, barking urgently toward the library, the source of the fire. Flames were visible now, consuming the antique desk and reaching for the ceiling. The blaze was concentrated, deliberate arson rather than accident. Matthew directed Emma and Rusty toward the kitchen door, the safest exit route. "Get to the maple tree and stay there. I'll call 911. The fire department arrived within minutes, but the damage was already significant. The library, with its irreplaceable antique books and the desk containing their research, was destroyed. Smoke damage extended throughout the first floor, and water damage from firefighting efforts created new problems in the previously repaired sections. Deputy Collins took statements, his professional detachment slipping slightly when Matthew mentioned the previous threat, sell or burn. This was no longer vandalism, but a serious crime, arson, potentially endangering lives. "You think Norton's behind this?" Collins asked, keeping his voice low, away from other deputies and firefighters. "I think someone wants us out badly enough to burn us out," Matthew replied carefully. The timing after Norton's development announcement and escalating pressures seemed significant. Collins nodded slowly. "I'll investigate properly this time. Fire investigation unit will look for accelerants, point of origin. If this was deliberately set..." He left the implications hanging. By dawn, the immediate crisis had passed. The fire was extinguished, the house still standing, though significantly damaged. Emma sat wrapped in a blanket beneath the maple tree, Rusty pressed against her side, both watching the firefighters with wide, shocked eyes. Matthew joined them, bone-weary and soot-stained. "You okay, kiddo?" Emma nodded, though her expression said otherwise. "They tried to burn our house." "They tried," Matthew agreed. "They failed. The house is still standing." "Are we going to leave now, like they want us to?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. This wasn't just about stubborn determination anymore, or solving historical mysteries. Their safety was at risk. Continuing the fight meant potentially exposing Emma to further danger. Matthew considered his options carefully. Surrender would be safest in the short term. Accept Norton's victory, take whatever compensation was offered, start fresh elsewhere. But surrender meant allowing corruption to triumph, teaching Emma that intimidation works, that power trumps truth. No, he said finally, we're not leaving, but you might stay with Margaret for a while until we're sure it's safe. Emma's chin lifted a gesture so reminiscent of her mother that it caught Matthew by surprise. I'm staying too. We're fixing this house together, remember? The simple courage in her voice cemented Matthew's resolve. They would continue, but with new determination and new precautions. Norton or whoever had escalated to arson had shown their desperation. People only resorted to such extreme measures when they feared losing through legitimate means. We'll need help, Matthew acknowledged. The fire destroyed our research, the journal, everything we'd collected. Not everything. Emma reached into her emergency bag, withdrawing the leather journal Matthew had thought lost in the fire. I keep it with me. For luck. The preserved journal wasn't just a historical record, now it was a symbol. Whatever had happened between the Reynolds and Norton families in 1961, whatever agreement had been struck beneath the ancient maple, the truth remained discoverable. And whatever Norton feared in that truth, Matthew was now more determined than ever to uncover it. As the sun rose over the damaged house, casting long shadows across the property, Matthew made a silent promise not just to rebuild what had been damaged, but to expose the corruption that threatened not just their home, but the integrity of the entire community. Norton had escalated from legal threats to potential murder. There could be no compromise, no settlement that left such actions unchallenged. The ancient maple stood witness to this new determination, its branches spreading protectively over them as they faced the damaged house. Somewhere on this property, perhaps in one of the hiding places they'd identified, Martha Sullivan had left evidence of the truth. And somewhere in that truth lay the key to defeating Norton, not just saving the Reynolds house, but protecting Oakwood Heights from the corruption that had festered for decades. We'll find it, Matthew promised, arm around Emma's shoulders as they surveyed the damage. And when we do, we'll make things right, not just for us, but for everyone. The acrid scent of charred wood hung over the property as dawn broke. Matthew surveyed the damage with weary eyes. The fire investigation team's conclusion confirmed his suspicions: professional arson targeted specifically at the library where they'd conducted most of their research. The timing immediately following their conversation with Samuel Peters was too precise to be coincidence. Deputy Collins had taken his statement with newfound seriousness, promising to question Norton and investigate properly. Got forensic evidence of accelerants at multiple ignition points, he'd explained. This wasn't kids or vandalism. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Matthew harbored no illusions about the investigation's probable outcome. Norton would have an alibi, his employees would corroborate it, and any hired professionals would be untraceable. Yet the escalation from threats to attempted destruction spoke volumes. Norton was desperate to prevent them from discovering something. Jack arrived as the investigators departed, his expression somber. Peters is convinced the fire proves we're on the right track. Says Norton wouldn't risk arson unless we were close to something that could ruin him. The township hearing is 4 days away, Matthew reminded him, gesturing toward the potential hiding places they'd identified before the fire. If Martha's documents are hidden in this house, we need to find them now. I brought reinforcements. Jack nodded toward his truck where two men waited. My cousins Tom and Mike worked construction with me for years. They know how to find hidden spaces without compromising structural integrity. The additional help proved invaluable. Tom and Mike brought specialized equipment, thermal cameras, to detect temperature differences in walls, moisture meters, to identify areas protected from environmental fluctuations, and modified stud finders to locate structural anomalies. They focused first on the basement, where uneven stonework suggested potential hiding places. The foundation dated to the original 1890s construction, with clear modifications during various renovations. Behind the ancient coal furnace, one section of wall produced a hollow sound when tapped. Definite void space here, Tom confirmed, examining readings from his equipment. About 2 feet deep, running 4 feet along this section. Removing the stones required meticulous care, preserving both potential evidence and the structural integrity of the already compromised house. By mid-afternoon, they had extracted enough stones to reveal a cavity behind the wall. Matthew's excitement crashed when he shone his flashlight into the empty space. Someone beat us to it, he realized, examining fresh scratch marks on the interior stonework. The lack of dust on these marks suggests it was recent. The discovery reinforced his growing conviction that they were under surveillance. The fire hadn't just been intimidation, it had been a diversion keeping them away, while Norton's people searched for the same documents. "We need to move faster," Jack urged. "They're searching too." Their next target was the unusual gap beneath the main staircase. Victorian homes typically featured storage under stairs, but this cupboard seemed shallower than the staircase width would allow. Mike's thermal imaging revealed a temperature differential along the back wall. "There's definitely something behind this panel." Careful examination exposed a cleverly disguised seam in the wooden paneling. When pressed in the correct sequence, a section pivoted inward, revealing a narrow passage just large enough for a person to crawl through. "Underground railroad," Jack whispered reverently. The rumors were true. The passage extended approximately 8 feet before opening into a small chamber beneath the staircase landing. Unlike the basement cavity, this space remained undisturbed, the layer of dust covering the floor unbroken by footprints. In the center sat a metal box, approximately the size of a small suitcase, its surface spotted with rust, but its lock intact. "Martha's insurance policy," Matthew murmured, carefully lifting the box and feeling the weight of contents shifting inside. The lock presented a challenge: no key, no combination, just solid steel that had weathered decades without compromise. Breaking it risked damaging the contents, but with the township hearing approaching, they couldn't wait. "I know someone who can open it without damage," Tom offered. "Old friend who works with antiques, specializes in historical locks. She's discreet." While Tom transported the box to his locksmith friend, Matthew and Jack checked the remaining potential hiding places. Each proved empty, suggesting Martha had chosen just the one location for her preserved documents. That evening, exhaustion overwhelmed Matthew's excitement. He visited Margaret's house, finding Emma teaching Rusty new tricks, while Margaret watched with grandmotherly indulgence. "Any progress?" Margaret asked when Emma stepped outside with the dog. Matthew described their discovery of the hidden passage and locked box. "We're hoping Martha left evidence about the original property transfer, something that disproves Norton's claim." Margaret's expression turned thoughtful. "Martha was meticulous about documentation. If she preserved evidence, it will be comprehensive. But be prepared, the truth might be more complicated than either family's version of events." Morning brought Tom's return with the unlocked busted's contents still undisturbed. "Liz says it's government surplus from the 70s, designed for classified document storage. Whatever's inside has been well protected from moisture and light." They gathered around the kitchen table as Matthew carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay several manila folders, their labels neatly typed: "Reynolds Norton Property Transfer, 1961. Survey Amendments, 1985, Sulawesi Correspondence Rezoning Changes, and Personal Clara Norton, James Reynolds." The last folder caught Matthew's attention immediately, but he disciplined himself to focus on the property documentation first, with the township hearing just days away. The Reynolds Norton Property Transfer folder contained the original deed from 1961, its pages yellowed but legible, the county seal and signatures intact. As Peters had suggested, the document included unusual covenants, conditions beyond standard ownership transfer. Matthew read aloud the critical section. "The undersigned parties agree that said property transfers from William Norton to James Reynolds in settlement of outstanding financial obligations with the following conditions. 1. The Norton family retains right of first refusal should the property be offered for sale. 2. The property shall not be subdivided or developed for commercial purposes during the lifetime of either signatory. 3. The maple tree marking the western boundary shall be preserved. 4. Upon the marriage of Clara Norton and James Reynolds, ownership shall be established as joint tenancy with right of survivorship." The final condition stunned them into silence. Clara Norton, William's wife Edward's mother, had apparently planned to marry James Reynolds after the property transfer. "That explains the rumors," Jack finally said, "but she never married him. Historical records show Clara remained William Norton's wife until his death." The Survey Amendments folder contained Martha's documentation of the altered property boundaries. Her meticulous notes recorded the original survey markers, the changes made in 1980. Damning copies of internal memos directing alterations, specifically to exclude the stream and adjacent land from environmental protection requirements. Norton needed the boundary change to bypass wetland regulations for his development. Matthew realized the original property line included riparian habitat that would have been protected under county ordinances. The correspondence folder provided further evidence of Norton's manipulation letters between county officials discussing zoning changes that would benefit specific development interests, with Norton's name frequently mentioned. Martha had included her own contemporaneous notes documenting meetings where these matters were discussed off the record. Finally, Matthew turned to the personal folder, reluctant to invade privacy yet needing the complete picture. Inside were letters exchanged between Clara Norton and James Reynolds, spanning from 1958 to 1984, chronicling a relationship that had endured despite separation and societal constraints. The earliest letters revealed their history: childhood friends who had developed deeper feelings separated when Clara's family moved away, reunited as adults already committed to others. The correspondence documented their struggle with forbidden feelings, their efforts to maintain honor while acknowledging what existed between them. A letter from Clara dated October 1961, the month matching the hidden note they'd discovered in the wall, explained the critical events. "Dearest James William knows. The burden of deception has become too great, and I confessed everything." His reaction was not what I feared, not rage, but resignation, perhaps even relief. "He has proposed a solution that preserves dignity for all. He will transfer the property to you in settlement of the loans, relieving him of financial obligation. In return, I will remain his wife until the children are grown, maintaining our family's appearance if not its substance. We made our promises beneath the maple, but must defer their fulfillment. The cost is high years apart, when we might have been together, but the alternative would destroy too many lives beyond our own. William asks only that the house he helped rebuild remain a home, not become a casualty of progress or profit. The debt is settled. The house returns to its rightful guardian. May they forgive what we could not repay. With enduring love, Clara." The letter matched exactly the note they'd found hidden in the wall, the same phrasing, the same initials. Clara had been Ann Clara Norton, using her first initial and middle name to preserve some privacy in the hidden message. The final letter in the collection, dated just weeks before James Reynolds' death in 1984, revealed the conclusion of their story. "My dearest James William has been gone 5 years now, the children established in their own lives. I have honored my commitment to him as you honored yours to preserve the property we both cherished. Edward has changed during his time away, hardened, focused solely on business success and community standing. He speaks of development plans that would transform Oakwood Heights, viewing the past as obstacle rather than foundation. He does not understand the agreement we made, the promises exchanged beneath the maple. I fear he will challenge your ownership once you are gone, rewrite history to suit his ambitions. I have spoken with Martha about preserving the truth, ensuring the documents that protect your legacy remain available should they be needed. The maple stands witness to promises kept and deferred. May it continue to guard what we valued most, not just property but principle. The understanding that some things transcend legal ownership and financial interest. With love that has endured beyond all expectation." Clara. Matthew sat back, processing the revelations. The property transfer had never been a simple foreclosure or a financial transaction. It had been part of a complex arrangement between 3 people navigating impossible circumstances: William Norton surrendering property but preserving family appearance, James Reynolds gaining the house but deferring relationship, Clara Norton honoring commitments to both men while sacrificing personal happiness. "Norton probably doesn't know the full story," Jack suggested. "Just enough to believe the property should have remained in his family." "Or he knows and doesn't care," Matthew countered. "The development potential outweighs any historical or personal considerations." They organized the documents carefully, making copies of the most critical evidence: the original deed with its unusual covenants, the documentation of altered surveys, the correspondence revealing Norton's manipulation of zoning regulations. The personal letters Matthew set aside, uncertain whether they should be made public even in defense of his claim. The township hearing was scheduled for Monday evening. Matthew contacted Patricia Winters, an attorney in the county seat with experience in property disputes and municipal law. After reviewing their evidence, she offered her assessment. "The original deed with these specific covenants effectively invalidates Norton's 1985 certificate," she confirmed. "And the documented alterations of survey records constitute fraud. The township board should recognize your claim based on this evidence alone. Should, Matthew noted. But will they, given Norton's influence in the economic pressure of his development plans? Patricia's expression remained professionally neutral. Present the evidence, clearly focus on the legal facts rather than personal history, and be prepared for Norton to fight back aggressively. He has significant resources and reputation at stake. Sunday brought unexpected support. Word of the arson had spread throughout Oakwood Heights, and while some still viewed Matthew as an obstacle to progress, others recognized the attack as crossing a critical line. Neighbors arrived with offers of help, clearing debris, temporary repairs to damaged areas, even casseroles and baked goods. More significantly, Richard Harrison, who had initially been so hostile at the diner, appeared with 3 retired mill workers who had known William Norton. "Heard about the fire," Harrison said gruffly. "Burning a man out is a coward's tactic." Norton's father would never have stooped so low, whatever his other faults. The men shared stories of William Norton, his craftsmanship, his struggles during the lumber industry downturn, his surprising lack of bitterness after losing the house. None had known about the arrangement with James Reynolds, but all confirmed William's continued involvement with the property even after the transfer. He helped maintain it for years, one recalled, weekends, evenings after mill work. People thought it strange him caring for a house that wasn't his anymore, but he always said he had a stake in keeping it sound. The personal testimonies added depth to the documented evidence, confirming the relationship had been more complex than either simple foreclosure or outright theft. William Norton had relinquished legal ownership but maintained connection to the house he had helped rebuild, honoring the agreement that had resolved impossible circumstances. Monday evening arrived with tension thick as summer storm clouds. The township meeting room filled beyond capacity, residents crowding doorways and standing along walls. Norton sat at one table with his attorney, an expensive import from the city-tailored suit and leather briefcase, telegraphing success and authority. Matthew Jack and Patricia Winters occupied the opposite table, their evidence organized in labeled folders. The township board members, 5 elected officials, regarded both parties with careful neutrality as the meeting commenced. The board chair, Ellen Ramirez, established ground rules before inviting Norton's attorney to present his client's claim. The presentation was polished, confident, framing Norton as a native son returning to benefit his hometown with economic development, prevented only by an outsider's mistaken claim to property rightfully belonging to the Norton family. The 1985 certificate was displayed on a professional easel, its official appearance lending weight to Norton's claim despite its questionable origins. "My client's father, William Norton, built that house with his own hands," the attorney concluded smoothly. Temporary financial reverses led to a conditional arrangement with James Reynolds, but the property's return to Norton ownership was documented and recorded in 1980. Mr. Reynolds' claim derives solely from an incomplete understanding of this history. Matthew noticed Norton's expression during the presentation, confident, almost smug, occasionally glancing toward Matthew, as if anticipating surrender in the face of overwhelming legal firepower. When Patricia Winters rose to present Matthew's case, the contrast in style was immediately apparent. Where Norton's attorney had been theatrical, she was methodical. Where he had appealed to emotion and community loyalty, she focused on documented facts and legal principles. The Reynolds ownership claim rests on 3 pillars. She began distributing copies of key documents to board members. First, the original 1961 deed transfer with specific covenants regarding future ownership. Second, evidence that the 1985 certificate presented by Mr. Norton was created fraudulently during a documented period of records manipulation. And third, correspondence confirming that the arrangement between William Norton and James Reynolds was more complex than a simple financial transaction. She presented the evidence systematically, the original deed with its unusual conditions, Martha Sullivan's documentation of survey alterations, statements from former county employees regarding the records scandal. Matthew had decided to keep the personal letters private unless absolutely necessary, focusing instead on the legal documentation that established his claim. The 1985 certificate is not merely questionable, but demonstrably fraudulent. Patricia continued presenting Martha's notes about Raymond Red Stamp's record alterations. Created after James Reynolds' death by a county clerk, subsequently removed for falsifying documents, it represents an attempt to circumvent the legal covenants established in the original transfer. Norton's confident expression had faded as the presentation progressed, replaced by tight-lipped anger as evidence mounted against his claim. His attorney requested a brief recess to review the newly presented documents. During the 15-minute break, Norton approached Matthew directly, voice low, to avoid being overheard. "You're making a mistake pushing this. Even if you win tonight, this isn't over. There are other ways to acquire property code violations, tax assessments, eminent domain for development. You can't afford to fight on all those fronts." The threat was explicit. Norton's resources allowed him to pursue multiple avenues of attack, extending the battle beyond Matthew's financial endurance. Matthew met his gaze steadily. "Some fights are worth having, even if you can't afford them," he responded quietly. "Some principles matter more than practical considerations." When the meeting resumed, Norton's attorney attempted to discredit the evidence, questioning Martha Sullivan's motivations, suggesting the covenants had been satisfied by subsequent events, arguing that economic benefits outweighed historical technicalities. As the presentations concluded, Board Chair Ramirez called for final statements from both claimants. Norton's attorney reiterated the economic benefits of resolving the dispute in his client's favor, emphasizing job creation and tax revenue. When Matthew's turn came, he rose instead of deferring to his attorney. The past weeks, from inheritance to arson to discovery, had transformed his relationship with this property from reluctant obligation to personal mission. "This dispute isn't really about who owns a dilapidated Victorian on the north edge of town," he began, voice steady despite the tension knotting his shoulders. "It's about whether documentation matters more than destruction, whether history has value beyond development potential, whether this community values truth over economic pressure." He gestured toward the evidence folders. "The documents show what really happened in 1961. Not a banker seizing property from a working man, not a temporary arrangement meant to be reversed, but a complex agreement between people navigating impossible circumstances with honor and mutual respect." Matthew turned slightly, addressing not just the board, but the community members crowding the room. William Norton transferred that property legally while maintaining connection to the house he helped rebuild. James Reynolds honored specific conditions protecting the property from commercial development. Both men kept commitments that went beyond financial interest, preserving something they believed had value beyond market price. He paused, gathering thoughts for the conclusion. "My daughter asked me recently if some places remember what happened in them, if houses and trees and land hold the truth, even when people try to rewrite it. I didn't have an answer then. But seeing how this property has gradually revealed its history, how it's brought together evidence of both honor and corruption, I'm beginning to think she might be right." Matthew directed his final words to the board members directly. "Honor the original agreement. Respect the documented evidence. Recognize that some values transcend development potential and tax revenue. The legacy of both families depends on it." The board's deliberation was surprisingly brief. After 15 minutes, they returned with a unanimous decision. Matthew's claim was recognized as valid based on the original deed, and covenants with Norton's 1985 certificate deemed insufficient to override the established transfer. Norton stormed from the meeting room, his expression promising retribution beyond legal channels. Patricia Winters confirmed Matthew's concerns as they gathered their evidence. He'll likely pursue other avenues, building code enforcement, tax reassessment, possibly even eminent domain, if he can convince the county commissioners that his development serves public interest. Tonight's victory buys time, not permanent resolution. The sobering assessment accompanied Matthew as he returned to the damaged house. Emma would remain with Margaret for another night, allowing him to assess their position without worrying about her immediate safety. Sleep evaded him as he contemplated their situation. The house remained partially fire-damaged, their financial resources nearly exhausted, and Norton's opposition unwavering. Even with legal ownership confirmed, the practical challenges of restoration seemed insurmountable. Morning brought unexpected visitors. Jack's cousins Tom and Mike, accompanied by 3 additional men, carrying tools and building supplies. "Heard you won at the township meeting." Tom greeted him. "Figured you could use help getting back on track after the fire." The offered assistance, skilled labor without expectation of payment, represented precisely what Matthew needed most. Yet pride made acceptance difficult, the contractor in him uncomfortable with charity. Jack arrived as Matthew hesitated, reading his expression accurately. "It's not charity, Matthew, it's community. Norton's not the only one with resources around here, he just has the financial kind. We have people, skills, materials we can spare. Throughout the day, more neighbors arrived, some with building supplies, others with food for workers, still others simply offering encouragement. Margaret brought Emma back mid-morning, the girl immediately joining the restoration efforts by organizing smaller materials and running messages between work crews. Richard Harrison appeared with 4 retired mill workers, all carrying tools and lumber. William Norton taught us craftsmanship, he explained gruffly. Seems fitting to use those skills preserving the house he helped build. By evening, the fire-damaged areas had been cleared, structural repairs begun, and protective tarps installed over vulnerable sections. The community effort had accomplished in one day what would have taken Matthew weeks working alone and without the expense he couldn't afford. As workers departed, promises of return the following day ringing in the air, Matthew found himself on the porch with Emma and Rusty, watching the sunset illuminate the ancient maple. The day's events had shifted something in his perspective, from viewing the house as a personal inheritance to seeing it as a community touchstone. "Dad," Emma's voice broke his contemplation. "I've been thinking about what Mr. Norton said at the meeting about turning everything into shops and offices. Do people really need more of those things?" The question captured the essential conflict: development versus preservation, economic growth versus community heritage. Matthew considered his response carefully. Some development is necessary, he acknowledged. Communities need jobs, services, places to shop and work. But that doesn't mean everything should be developed or that profit potential should determine what survives. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Like how national parks protect special places, even though they could probably make lots of money if they built hotels and stuff everywhere. The comparison sparked an idea, not a complete solution, but a potential direction. Matthew spent the evening researching historical designation possibilities, preservation grants, conservation easements, mechanisms that might protect the property beyond his personal ownership. The township's recognition of his claim had established legal standing to pursue these options. If the house could receive historical designation based on architectural significance, connection to Underground Railroad history, or cultural importance to the community, certain protections would apply regardless of future ownership. Norton's development plans would face additional hurdles if the Reynolds property received historical designation, particularly with the documented Underground Railroad connection. Environmental protection for the stream and adjacent land would further complicate commercial development. Morning brought renewed community support workers returning to continue restoration. Additional supplies delivered, even local businesses contributing materials and services. The unofficial restoration project had become a community statement, resistance against Norton's vision of progress through demolition. Matthew worked alongside neighbors, directing efforts while considering the emerging possibility. The house need not remain solely private property. It could serve broader community purposes while preserving its historical significance. Deputy Collins arrived mid-morning with unexpected news. "Got a witness who saw a known associate of Norton's at the property that night," he reported. "Not enough for an arrest yet, but enough to execute search warrants for phone records and financial transactions. The investigation's continuing." The development put additional pressure on Norton, potentially compromising his public image and adding criminal investigation to the property dispute. Norton's response came swiftly, not through legal channels, but through direct confrontation. His black SUV arrived as community volunteers worked on roof repairs, the vehicle stopping abruptly at the edge of the driveway. Norton emerged alone, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the restoration progress. Matthew descended from the porch to meet him, maintaining distance but refusing to cede ground. The confrontation drew attention from workers' conversations falling silent as tension crackled between the two men. "This changes nothing," Norton's voice carried clearly in the sudden quiet. "You want a skirmish, not the war. I built this town, Reynolds. One township board decision won't stop progress." The claim of personally building the community rather than inheriting wealth and position revealed Norton's self-delusion. Matthew recognized the dangerous combination facing him: entitlement, resources, and wounded pride. "Your father helped build this house," Matthew corrected calmly. "He transferred it legally to my grandfather. The township board simply recognized documented fact." Norton's expression darkened further. "My father was manipulated during financial distress. Reynolds took advantage." "That's not what happened." Matthew interrupted, unwilling to allow the continued distortion. "Your parents and my grandfather had a complex relationship. The arrangement they made preserved dignity for everyone involved. The documentation is clear. Something in Norton's expression shifted a flicker of uncertainty beneath the anger. What documentation? What relationship? The questions confirmed Matthew's suspicion that Norton didn't know the full history, had never read the correspondence between Clara Norton and James Reynolds, never understood the true nature of the arrangement. Your father transferred this property as part of an honorable agreement, Matthew said carefully, unwilling to reveal Clara's personal history publicly. He continued maintaining it even after the transfer. The agreement included specific conditions preventing commercial development conditions your father valued enough to enshrine in legal covenants. Norton's certainty wavered visibly. What conditions? What agreement? Matthew glanced around at the gathered workers, the community members who had rallied to support the restoration. This confrontation had become public, but some truths remained private, belonging to the families involved rather than community consumption. We should discuss this privately, he suggested, gesturing toward the house. Some aspects of family history deserve discretion. Norton hesitated, suspicion warring with curiosity, before finally nodding curtly and following Matthew into the house. In the kitchen, one of the few rooms undamaged by fire, Matthew retrieved the folder of personal correspondence. Before you read these, understand that I'm sharing them only to establish truth, not to cause pain or embarrassment. What happened between our families was complex, motivated by honor as much as necessity. Norton accepted the folder, warily opening it to scan the first letter. His expression shifted from skepticism to shock as he continued reading, color draining from his face, as the true relationship between his mother and James Reynolds became clear. "This can't be real," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "My mother wouldn't—" "The letters are authentic," Matthew confirmed gently. "Your mother and my grandfather had feelings for each other that predated her marriage. They never acted dishonorably. The transfer arrangement was suggested by your father to resolve an impossible situation with dignity for everyone." Norton continued reading, his hands trembling slightly as he absorbed revelations that contradicted the narrative he'd constructed. The final letter, Clara's message to James shortly before his death, seemed to affect him most deeply, perhaps because it revealed his mother's assessment of his own character and ambitions. When he finally looked up, Norton's expression had transformed. The aggressive businessman replaced by a man confronting painful truths about his family and himself. "She never told me any of this. All these years I believed." "People often protect those they love from difficult truths," Matthew observed. "Your mother honored her commitment to your father throughout his life. That speaks to her character, not against it." Norton closed the folder carefully, returning it with unexpected gentleness. "These should remain private. Whatever happened between them belongs to history now." The concession represented significant shift, though Matthew remained cautious. Norton's ambitions hadn't necessarily changed, just his understanding of the property's history. "What happens now?" Matthew asked directly. "The development plans, the property dispute? Where does this leave us?" Norton moved to the window, looking out at the community members working to restore the fire-damaged house. His silence stretched long enough that Matthew wondered if he would answer at all. "I still believe in progress," Norton finally said. "Development that brings economic opportunity, jobs, modern amenities. But perhaps," he paused, seeming to reconsider his words, "perhaps not every piece of land needs to be developed. Some places carry more value as they are." The concession, however limited, opened possibility for compromise rather than continued conflict. Matthew considered his emerging idea about the property's potential future. What if there's a middle path development that preserves rather than destroys, that honors history while creating opportunity? Norton turned, skepticism returning. "Meaning what exactly?" "This house has historical significance beyond our family's connection. The Underground Railroad passage, the architectural features, the craftsmanship. With proper designation, it could become a community asset, historical museum, educational center, gathering space." Matthew continued, the concept becoming clearer as he articulated it. "Your development could proceed around this property with the house and immediate grounds preserved as historical space. The stream and riparian habitat could receive environmental protection while still allowing appropriate development nearby. The proposal wasn't surrender, but potential collaboration, preserving what mattered most while allowing progress where appropriate." Norton considered it with unexpected seriousness, his business mind evaluating possibilities despite his earlier intransigence. Historical designation would complicate development plans, he acknowledged, but might also create marketing opportunities, luxury housing adjacent to preserved historical property, commercial space with authentic heritage connection. The optics would be better than battling preservation efforts. The pragmatic assessment wasn't enthusiastic embracement, but represented potential common ground, a businessman recognizing that adaptation might prove more profitable than continued confrontation. I'll need to review plans, consult with the architects and marketing team. Norton concluded, his tone businesslike but lacking previous hostility. No commitments yet, but I'm open to exploring alternatives that preserve key historical elements while allowing appropriate development. The qualified openness represented more progress than Matthew had dared hope for. Not resolution, but the possibility of collaboration rather than conflict. Outside, the community restoration effort continued unabated. Matthew rejoined them, directing work while processing the unexpected shift in Norton's position. Emma approached, curiosity evident in her expression. What did Mr. Norton want? Is he still trying to take our house? Matthew considered how to explain the complex situation in terms a 10-year-old could understand. He wanted to understand our family history better, and he's thinking about ways we might work together instead of fighting, preserving the house while allowing development in other areas. Emma's expression brightened. Like how the house could be a museum, Margaret said it could be if it's really old and important enough. Exactly like that, Matthew confirmed. This house might serve the community better as shared space rather than just our private home. The concept resonated with the volunteers as word spread throughout the day. The Reynolds House, not just as privately owned historical property, but as community heritage center, educational resource gathering space. Several offered specific assistance beyond physical restoration, grant writing experience, historical documentation skills, educational programming. Background. By evening, what had begun as simple property dispute had evolved into community vision preservation, with purpose history made accessible rather than isolated behind private ownership. The restoration continued with renewed energy, workers seeing beyond fire damage to potential future. 4 months later, Matthew stood on the fully restored porch of what was now officially the Reynolds Norton Heritage House, watching as community members gathered for the dedication ceremony. The transformation had been remarkable, from dilapidated inheritance to distinguished historical site, from personal burden to community asset. The historical designation process had proceeded with unexpected support from Norton Development, which had adjusted plans to incorporate the historical property as centerpiece rather than obstacle. Edward Norton had discovered that association with preservation efforts improved his company's image, creating marketing opportunities that offset the loss of developable acreage. The house itself had been meticulously restored, not just repaired, but returned to historical accuracy, its architectural features preserved, its underground railroad connection documented and interpreted for educational purposes. One section housed historical exhibits about Oakwood Heights' development, another provided community meeting space, while a third demonstrated period-appropriate building techniques. Emma moved comfortably among visitors, her self-appointed role as junior tour guide embraced with characteristic enthusiasm. Rusty followed at respectful distance, the dog's protective instincts now extended to the property itself rather than just its inhabitants. Jack appeared beside Matthew, surveying the gathering with quiet satisfaction. Not how you expected this to turn out when you inherited the place, I'm guessing. Matthew acknowledged the understatement with a smile. Not even close. I was thinking quick repairs and quick resale, get back to the city, start over somewhere else. And now, the question invited reflection on their transformed circumstances. Matthew had established a new contracting business focused on historical restoration with projects throughout the county and growing reputation for craftsmanship and authenticity. Emma had thrived in the small-town environment, developing confidence and connection to community that had been lacking in their previous life. Now we're home, Matthew said simply. Not just in the house, but in Oakwood Heights. Funny how fighting for something can make you belong to it. Edward Norton approached, his tailored business attire replaced by more casual clothing for the community celebration. The relationship between the men remained cautious, but had evolved from antagonism to guarded respect, their shared connection to the property's history creating unexpected common ground. The historical designation is attracting attention beyond Oakwood Heights, Norton observed. State Preservation Society is featuring the property in their quarterly publication. The publicity benefited both the Heritage Center and Norton's adjacent development historical significance, creating marketing appeal for the luxury townhomes under construction nearby. Self-interest aligned with preservation had proven more effective than appeals to sentiment or principle alone. Your mother would have appreciated seeing the house preserved this way, Matthew suggested, carefully, still navigating the personal aspects of their intertwined family histories. Norton's expression softened slightly. She valued heritage more than I understood. Progress doesn't always require demolishing the past. Sometimes it means building around what deserves preservation. As evening approached, the gathering moved to the ancient maple tree for the culmination of the ceremony. Margaret Wilson had organized a tree lighting event with small lanterns hung from lower branches, creating a canopy of gentle illumination. The tree, now protected by the same historical designation as the house, stood as living witness to generations of promises, secrets, and eventual reconciliation. This tree has witnessed everything, Margaret told the gathered community. The original construction, William Norton's craftsmanship, the difficult decisions of 1961, the rediscovery of truth. It stands as living connection between past and present, between families once divided and now reunited in common purpose. As darkness fell, Matthew stood beside Emma and Rusty beneath the illuminated branches. The simple beauty of the moment captured what their months of struggle had ultimately revealed. That preservation wasn't about freezing the past, but about connecting it meaningfully to the present, allowing communities to build future with understanding rather than amnesia. Do you think they are happy with how everything turned out? Emma asked, her hand resting on the section of trunk where the bronze marker remained partially embedded in growing bark. Your grandfather and the Nortons, I mean. The question contained wisdom beyond her years, recognition that their efforts served something beyond themselves, honoring commitments made by people long gone, but whose decisions still shape the present. I think they'd recognize that we found the truth and did our best with it, Matthew answered carefully, not erasing the past or getting stuck in it, but learning from it, preserving what matters most. Emma nodded, satisfied with the response. The house feels different now, not just ours, but everybody's, like it was always supposed to be. As the final lanterns were lit, casting their warm glow across the assembled community, Matthew realized that what had begun as reluctant inheritance had transformed into purposeful legacy. The house had indeed become what William Norton and James Reynolds had valued, not merely structure, but symbol, physical embodiment of promises kept and honor maintained across generations. Some places are worth fighting for. Matthew set his arm around Emma's shoulders as they watched their neighbors celebrate beneath the maple's protective canopy, especially when you discover they're fighting for you, too. The Reynolds Norton Heritage House stood illuminated against the night sky, no longer a symbol of division, but a beacon of reconciliation, proof that even the most bitter conflicts could, with truth and goodwill, transform into common purpose. The maple tree's branches spread wide above them all, guardian of secrets, now revealed, protector of promises finally fulfilled.